Good morning. I promised last night that we were going to start right on time, so I'm a man of my word. Just in case you weren't here last evening for our opening, I did mention that this is a different kind of event and that one of the out-of-the-box things we would be doing is having assigned seats this morning. And so if you just walked right in with your yogurt parfait and grabbed a seat, no problem. But you might just take a quick look and make sure that your name is on one of those table tents. And if not, anybody in a gold name tag can help you figure out where to be. A huge part of our theory of change is that if we bring the right people together, most of the work will happen itself. And so we've been very intentional about not only who's in the room, but who's sitting with whom. So thank you so much. Good morning and welcome home to Notre Dame. My name is Adam Kronk. I'm part of the team at the Institute for Ethics in the Common Good. We are very, very grateful for the gift of your presence. As I mentioned last night, it's our hope that the principles of dignity, embodiment, love, transcendence, and agency are not simply intellectual concepts that we'll hear about today, but gifts that we will give one another. And so in that spirit, if you're here, we ask you to enter fully in and encounter God's presence in the person right in front of you or right next to you, okay? It's my pleasure this morning to invite up Father John Jenkins. Elected in 2005 as the University of Notre Dame's 17th president, Reverend John I. Jenkins, CSC, served 4 terms on behalf of the Board of Trustees, stepping down in 2024 after 19 years of exemplary leadership and growth. As president, he devoted himself to fostering the university's unique place in academia, the church, the United States, and the world. As president and now as president emeritus, he has been a staunch champion of this tradition of ethical thought. In honor of Father John's extraordinary leadership in 2024, through generous support of the university's Board of Trustees, Notre Dame established the Reverend John I. Jenkins CSC Center for Virtue Ethics that is housed within our Institute for Ethics and the Common Good. The Jenkins Center for Virtue Ethics supports preeminent scholars whose research advances human flourishing in both moral and spiritual contexts. It facilitates the development of undergraduate courses exploring topics such as justice and the common good, and deepens the ethical formation of Notre Dame students and faculty. The center also plays a transformative role in public discussion, drawing citizens into meaningful dialogue informed by virtue ethics, one of the most powerful and enduring contributions of the Catholic philosophical tradition. Father Jenkins spoke with our Institute team several months ago this year, and we were talking about virtue ethics in light of technology. And one of the aphorisms that he shared with us has stuck with us and informed the way that we think about this event. And here's how it goes. A lot of technology is about making things faster and easier. And virtue ethics, by its nature, is slow and hard. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Father John Jenkins.
Adam, thanks for that generous introduction, and welcome to all of you. It's really great to have you at Notre Dame, and I'm excited about this conference. And it is now my honor to introduce someone else, Meghan Sullivan, who is our kickoff speaker for this conference. Meghan is the Wilsey Family Professor of Philosophy and Director of Notre Dame's Ethics Initiative. In 2022, she became the founding director of the Institute for Ethics and the Common Good, a university-wide institute that convenes scholars, students, and leaders to advance moral understanding and develop compelling responses to the most pressing ethical issues of our era. The Institute is home to Notre Dame's work in virtue ethics. It includes, and I blush to mention this, as Adam said, the Jenkins Center for Virtue Ethics, which was made possible by some extraordinarily generous Notre Dame benefactors to whom I'm extremely grateful. It is also home to the Notre Dame IBM Technology Ethics Lab and a major collaborative grant with the John Templeton Foundation on the role of love in ethics and social change. Meghan is a well-loved teacher here at Notre Dame and known nationally for developing our God and the Good Life course. She's published articles in leading philosophy journals and ethics books with both Oxford University Press and Penguin. She has degrees from the University of Virginia, Rutgers, and Oxford, where she studied as a U.S. Rhodes Scholar. For the past year, Meghan and her team have been working with the Lilly Endowment and each of you on a planning grant to envision the role of faith-based ethics in the era of powerful AI. Meghan is a dynamic leader and a dear friend and cherished colleague of mine. We are pleased now to welcome her and hear more about this vision.
Thank you, Father John. That was very kind and obviously very meaningful for me. Welcome, everyone. Well, you survived the first day. We're so glad to have you with us. We are here to contemplate what it would mean for there to be a growth in conscience and in ethics that is proportionate to the astounding growth in digital technology that we are currently witnessing. And it's an exciting time, but it's also a time, as we heard last night, where discernment is required. In fact, it's probably needed more than ever. We are so thrilled to invite all of you guys to our campus to have a much more focused opportunity to ask these questions and to undertake this discernment this week. As I was preparing for this talk, I was trying to think of other points in recent human history when humanity needed an ethical growth spurt. So when there was a big change in technology that forced us to rethink many of our key paradigms and to rethink the conscience of both our nation and of individuals that have to live out their lives in the midst of this technology. And obviously, one of the examples that comes to mind is 80 years ago and the discovery and harnessing of atomic energy. On August 6, 1945, at 10:45 a.m., the United States, citizens of the United States, learned through a missive from President Truman that two things were very different about the world than what had been true on August 5th, 1945. First, we learned that there had been a secret program for years among scientists, a so-called battle of the laboratories, to figure out a way to harness one of the most fundamental physical forces in the universe. And, to quote Harry Truman, we spent $2 billion on the biggest gamble in scientific history, and we won. So a great piece of news. This huge discovery had been made that previously very few people, if you were not involved with the Manhattan Project, were aware of. The second piece of news, of course, was that scientific knowledge had been harnessed to create a weapon that was 2,000 times more powerful than any weapon previously known to man. And then that weapon had been deployed on Hiroshima. I think it's very interesting that on August 7th, 1945, the New York Times, as we were processing and analyzing this information, we didn't have the 24-hour news cycle back then where you could immediately get commentary. You had to wait for the next day's paper to see people starting to absorb and morally process what happened. And Hanson Baldwin, who was the military editor for the New York Times, he turned to Christian scripture to describe what was happening. He wrote to these readers, "We've clinched victory in the Pacific, but we've sown the whirlwind. He referenced Hosea 8, so a famous passage of the Bible about the golden calf. A craftsman made it. It is not God. It might feel like God, but it is not God. They sow the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. I think what's moving about this passage is not only that we turn to Christian scripture immediately to try to understand the moral significance of this technological development, but also the humility that this particular passage evinces. Right now, in 2025, we're going through an era of what I would describe as technological triumphalism. Like every single advance, we're like, yes, America, we did it. But for Hanson Baldwin and for readers that were grappling with what it meant to live in this new atomic era, the first virtue that they turned to was humility. Humans build things, we craft things, we sow the wind, but oftentimes we get something back that we did not predict and which is not good for us. And we have to approach this kind of advancement with humility. But we also have to bring other virtues to bear on this conversation. And it's really interesting as we undertake civilizationally this discernment about what it means to live our lives in an era with very powerful forms of artificial intelligence now at our fingertips. Which voices are in the conversation and which perspectives do we deem relevant to thinking about the moral significance of our lives and the world that we are creating with this technology? In the 20th century, Christians were very involved in major social transformations, especially in the West, especially in this country. You had theologians like Reinhold Niebuhr, who served on the Council of Foreign Relations during the Cold War and provided important guidance to people who were making decisions about how we were going to use those atomic weapons going forward. Congregations from many different Christian denominations were deeply involved in the civil rights movement. And in fact, while there were central leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., there were also many local congregations who made that transformation possible through, nameless, they didn't become famous, service and commitment, harnessing Christian virtues and Christian ethics towards the cause of the civil rights. Christians were sometimes involved very controversially in debates about ethics in this country, but through most of the 20th century, they had a seat at the table. In the 21st century, one of the biggest ethical transformations we have already witnessed is the transformation to a digital economy. The advent of the internet, the invention of social media, the widespread, seemingly frictionless shift that many of us witnessed from a world of books and libraries and physical interaction to a world where actually a great deal of human knowledge can be accessed now on a smartphone. Christians were largely absent from the conversation about this transition. And there are a variety of reasons for this. One, this transition was largely driven by areas of the country that tend to not have a very strong Christian presence. Two, and I think this is probably more important, the transition to a digital economy, it happened really fast. It happened just as quickly as the transition to an atomic world 80 years ago. But it happened in such a widespread and diffuse and ubiquitous way that really nobody was taking enough time to stop and ask the kind of significant ethical questions that this transformation was raising. We saw the rise of the internet era coincide with a rapid rise in disaffiliation from Christian institutions. We saw the early days of the internet coincide with the height of the public understanding of the sexual abuse crisis. There are a variety of causal explanations we can point to for why Christians have not been a prominent voice in this transition. But one thing that we believe at Notre Dame is that it would be a catastrophe if Christians were not present for the next phase of the discussion about digital transformation that we're currently witnessing. And that's because as we move to an economy and to a society that has access to very, very powerful forms of artificial intelligence, and where this kind of technology, these models are ubiquitous in our day-to-day lives, there are profound questions about what it means to lead a good human life and what it means to serve the common good, which Christians have fantastic insight on and which will play a vital role in the bigger pluralistic debate that we are going to have about the world that we're going to build with this technology. We already see this. I've got a little folder on my computer where I just collect news articles that seem like philosophical or spiritual, and they're about AI. And this folder has become nearly pointless because it's literally like every day there's a new one. And of course, and I kind of feed the beast. I click on it and of course read them and save them, so that just encourages the New York Times to publish more of them. But you can see these profound questions. Some of them are, people increasingly turning to forms of artificial intelligence to get advice on parenting, or to get advice on like any aspect of the good life that normally you might have called your mom. Maybe if you were a really good person, you would have called your priest. Now you can just 24/7 on demand access your chatbot. There was an absolutely fascinating article in the New York Times last weekend about chatbots now that simulate directly talking to God, even with like King James inflection. So like, you can say like, dear God, should I be repentant about this horrible thing I said to my colleague? And the chatbot says like, oh, my child. Like, it tries to minister to you and you're just like, this is getting pretty weird. There are also obviously profound existential questions about how we are going to use this technology to transform our economic institutions, our workplaces, our educational institutions. Are we going to allow this technology to be put into drones and used for security and defense applications? It goes all the way up to the most existential questions that human beings face. One of our key themes in this week together is that Christians have a whole lot to offer as we try to answer these questions, and that it would be bad not just for Christian communities, but for everyone, for these perspectives to not be at the table in these conversations. And we have to get our act together. November 2022, when ChatGPT was released on the open market, there are many disanalogies between that event, obviously, and the bombing in Hiroshima. For one, nobody's lives were lost. It wasn't an act of violence committed against another state. However, it was this wake-up call about the power and ubiquity of this technology that I think for a lot of people really shook them, and they realized, oh my gosh, this was a science fiction possibility before, and now we can see in reality what the future of our digital lives is going to look like. Generative AI especially, the very creative forms of AI that these large models now have made available to us. We saw right after that November 2022 release a huge upswing in investment in this technology. My graph only goes to 2023. I pulled the information from HI, an absolutely amazing AI ethics research lab at Stanford. But in 2023, you see this precipitous jump, $25.3 billion being put just into investing and developing and deploying this technology. The number now is probably close to $60 billion last year. We talk about the US in 1945 making a $2 billion scientific gamble and winning. We are now making a $100 billion scientific gamble on this. And there is no version of the future where this technology does not become ubiquitous in our lives with this kind of investment behind it. One of the passages, one of the quotes that we heard from many of you guys when we were doing our study in our focus groups over the past year was, we cannot slow down this technology. The only thing that we can do is speed up and deepen the conversation. And that's what's brought us together. Last summer, we had the opportunity to have some amazing conversations with the Lilly Endowment about how we were going to start to understand the landscape for Christian voices and perspectives on the ethical questions that this new artificial intelligence is raising. We had amazing conversations with Chris and with Shannon Ross, and one of the early upshots from those conversations was the University of Notre Dame. We care very deeply about being a place that convenes these kinds of ethical discussions, and we still hadn't wrapped our head around what was happening in the Christian world when it comes to this technology. It's so new and it's moving so fast, but it felt very urgent. And so we undertook this planning grant over the past year that a majority of you were very involved in. We did 137 one-hour interviews with technologists, with ethicists, with faith leaders from a variety of Christian denominations, from journalists and policymakers, asking two questions. One, what unique perspectives do you think the Christian community has to offer to this discussion about AI ethics that we're watching unfold right now? And two, what do you think it would take to get those voices into the conversation? And what are our prospects for helping mobilize Christians to participate in this debate? And we learned a lot. We're going to be reviewing a lot of that over the course of our time together this week. One of the biggest upshots to come out of our conversations was that the Christian community largely agrees with non-Christian secular counterparts about what we might call the ethical floor. And we'll get to that in just a second, but the thought that we should be building AI that recognizes our right to privacy, we should build AI that's safe, that's explainable, that's responsible to users in key ways, that's fair, that's important. But Christians have so much more to offer this debate that other people should also be paying attention to. And 4 big insights that came out of our conversation that have formed our planning for this conversation. One, talking with a lot of you, we learned that this technology is raising powerful questions about human flourishing and the common good that go far beyond mere questions of safety and compliance and transparency. And it's time that those questions also get their airing. Second, we learned that there actually is a whole lot of energy and Christian communities in these tech hubs who are doing work to try to mobilize people to think about these questions. We have this stereotype of Silicon Valley of being a hyper-secular environment. But in fact, if you peek under the surface, you meet incredible people like Paul Taylor and Brian Greene, Christian leaders in this area who are actually pastoring large communities, who are thinking very deeply about these questions and trying to do this work, leading the way, but are serving communities that are hungry for a whole lot more depth than they're currently being offered. And that lack of depth comes probably from the sort of shallow, vaguely like quasi-spiritual interest or spiritually curious culture that's been cultivated around the technology industry, which has not had the opportunity to really come into contact with deep and serious philosophical and theological reflection. But these are smart and well-intentioned people that are developing this technology. And if those opportunities were provided to them, we believe they'd absolutely respond. Third, there's a reason why people love AI. There's a reason why people love chatbots, why people are turning to Godbot to try to answer their questions. There are deep human needs that are not right now being adequately served by our schools, by our churches, and by our civic institutions. Those institutions are not meeting those needs, so of course people are going to turn to a very powerful and cool and interesting and generative new technology. But that's a wake-up call for those of us that care deeply about our schools and our churches and our civic institutions to try to strengthen them to meet those needs, rather than letting them be displaced by this new technology. And finally, we realized that $25 billion in 2023, $60 billion in 2024, this is a huge transformation that's happening. If Christian communities are likely to have any impact on the trajectory of our society, the trajectory of our debate about this, the ethical significance of this technology, we have to do it in a more coordinated way. Because the forces that are working to develop and deploy this technology are also highly networked and highly coordinated. We've got to get a whole lot more serious about the impact that we want to have. So let's talk a little bit about that impact. And I mentioned the ethical floor. I put up Anthropic's mission statement, which is probably one of the catchiest and most memorable ethical mission statements for one of these large AI firms right now. Claude is promised to be an AI that is helpful, honest, and harmless. And I'd like to think that like every single one of us in the audience here today can get behind that. Like that's the floor, that's the minimum we want from this technology. Safety, reliability, transparency. It is extremely important that Christian communities get behind efforts to ensure that that direction is the direction that this technology goes. And that's not always such an easy argument anymore. We see these kinds of ethical disputes blowing up every day with these large models. The ethical floor is necessary, but it is by no means sufficient. And actually, way too much of our conversation about AI ethics right now is hovering merely around questions about building AI that is compliant, that satisfies like just very mere duty-based ethics. One of the most important things that Christians have to offer the debate about how we should design AI and deploy it in our lives and in society is building a virtue ethical framework on top of that. Virtue ethics, unlike compliance ethics, offers a vision of what a flourishing human life is. It offers a vision of what the common good is, that we should try to develop technology toward, to serve, and that we should guard against when the golden calves that we build, the things that we craft, start to pose obstacles to that vision. So what is the vision? I mean, this was one of the most fascinating products to come out of all of our conversations in the past year. Many of you guys have heard versions of it, and we've debated it with you. We did these 4 focus groups where we went out to Silicon Valley, we went to Boston, we went to Washington, D.C., and we hosted a bunch of our colleagues here at Notre Dame. And we really hashed out these 5 concepts. And as a philosopher, I was like, I have to learn all this stuff about different models for this job right now, and that's great. But as a philosopher, this was where I really came alive. And finally, we could talk about these big ideas. The second half of my talk, I want to lay out this framework, and I want to talk a bit about the background, the theological and philosophical background of it, and then also where we think the urgent applications are. And to get us started, we shared with many of you guys before you attended the conference a little explainer video that we made. I thought we'd play that video very briefly, and then we'll go a layer deeper in the second half of this talk. Does that sound good? All right. So here we go.
The rapid rise of artificial intelligence is causing considerable, widespread anxiety. What will the impact be on us and our children? Is the social fabric that holds us together beginning to unravel? Whenever major disruptive changes have occurred throughout history, people of faith have always been there, re-knitting that fabric. We need to ask, what makes a human life worth living? And how is this unique, valuable, and distinct from what technology offers us? At the University of Notre Dame, we've developed the Delta framework to guide these conversations. Dignity. Every person is valuable because they are human, not because of how smart, wealthy, or productive they are. When using AI to increase scale, speed, or efficiency, we need to ask how this affects individuals. Embodiment. We are physical, social, vulnerable people. Our senses help us cherish what we encounter, and mortality makes life precious. Virtual reality can never fully capture lived experience. Love. Loving relationships involve two-way exchanges. Tools like chatbots might simulate companionship, but we need real, messy human connections to flourish. Transcendence. There are many good, beautiful things that we did not create. As we begin to use AI to interpret the world, we need to cultivate our capacity for awe and gratitude. Agency. To live a good life, people need the freedom, focus, and ability to make moral choices. Technology can diminish this potential. We must protect decisions that only a human conscience should make. Join us in this work. You can help the world think differently about AI.
So let's take a minute and we'll, yeah, thank you. The video was not made by AI. It was made by human beings, some actually fabulous human beings at Akimbo, which helped us do this animation. Have been wonderful to work with. Let's take a minute now, and what I thought we would do is we'll take each of the 5 principles. I want to speak briefly about why Christians are very invested in that principle and what the sort of philosophical and theological connections or resonance is for Christians. But then I also want to talk about how that principle informs our thinking about AI in a way that I think everybody should be interested in, or at least should be a key part of the conversation regardless of your faith background. And we start with dignity. We had breakfast yesterday with Cardinal Pierre, who many of you guys were able to meet last night, the Pope's nuncio to the United States, his ambassador to the United States. And we were talking through this framework with him, and he just kept pointing at D, and he was like, dignity, 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 dignity. He's like, I don't even know you need the other four. If you really understood dignity, you would have this. And I was like, oh, we need the other four to make the acronym work. But there's a reason why we start with human dignity. In the Christian worldview, every single human being is created in the image and likeness of God. And that means that their life has inherent worth and value. Just inherent, inalienable worth and value, unlimited worth and value. What does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God? We might have lazily thought in previous generations that what makes human beings special among other creatures in the world is our ability to solve problems, our ability to make art. Like, that's what God does that he gave to us. One of the most profound philosophical questions that generative AI is raising for a lot of people, if you think that's what it means to be an image bearer, well, man, large models can do that now. They can actually do it faster. In many cases, they can solve problems much more quickly than we can. If we thought that was what connected us with God, we've got a major, major theological problem on our hands. I think what's going to be extremely important for Christian voices in the era of powerful and generative AI is to be able to say our ability to solve problems quickly, to compute things quickly, that was never what we shared with God. We shared something more sacred and even more basic than that. And that has to be upheld in any ethical and rights regime that we build in the era of powerful artificial intelligence. This means also making sure that as we become a culture that's addicted to the paradigm of optimization, we're just always looking for the most optimal solution. AI is extraordinarily good at solving optimization problems. We realize that in Christian ethics, no person with dignity can be left behind. Like, people cannot be optimized out of the equation. Getting a little bit more practical and moving off the theological basis for this, we are already witnessing this technology absolutely transform our workplaces and our educational institutions. And there are going to be tremendous questions we are going to hear about later today at this conference, about what it means to ensure a transition to a powerful AI economy that respects the dignity of workers and the dignity of learners, and what it means for human dignity to be at the forefront of how we plan these transitions. And these are going to be very hard questions that firms are going to face. We are already feeling this acutely in universities and in schools, but questions that we now have to confront, and we've got to decide what the vision of human dignity is that's going to animate the transition. Let's talk about embodiment. For Christians, it is extraordinarily important that God himself thought that it was valuable and important to take on a mortal human body. Our vulnerability, our embodiment, the fact that we suffer pain, these are all things that God himself deems are good and worthy of himself. At the really science fiction fringe of work in artificial intelligence right now, and we're going to hear about this also at the conference, there's this hope, a misguided hope, Christians think, that we will make ourselves immortal by somehow capturing our manners of speech and our data in models. That is a way of achieving eternal life, of beating death. Christians are absolutely going to resist this. When we die in this life, we are gone because we have bodies. If we are going to have life beyond this, it is not going to happen through a product that is sold to you by craftsmen in Silicon Valley. Like, that is not the road to eternal life. And in fact, it's important as we live this life that we also realize that one of the things that makes human lives meaningful is the fact that they're short, that we are vulnerable, we're dependent upon other people, and that we live them out in bodies. How does this affect our practical deliberations about AI? Well, at least two ways. One, this new technology holds out the promise of absolutely revolutionizing medicine and healthcare. We see this with DeepMind and Demis Hassabis at Google, who have won the Nobel Prize for chemistry just a few years ago for harnessing these large models to discover new ways of creating proteins and compounds that promise new drugs that can cure diseases that human scientists were not able to figure out a way to cure before. But as some of our colleagues here know, this era of precision medicine is going to require a new era in bioethics to accompany this technology. And there are profound questions about where healing and enhancement differ and which aspects of our embodied life we should attempt to preserve and that scientists and medicine shouldn't disturb. At a more day-to-day level, we've also seen with the era of social media and the internet, so much more of our lives happen in digital environments rather than in physical environments. Part of our commitment to embodiment is the idea that what makes human lives meaningful is that they're lived out in physical space. Physical presence, human presence, is something that is deeply valuable and meaningful for our lives. As our digital lives become superpowered, what does it mean to preserve space for physical presence and connection? And how can we make sure that we're not developing addictive habits around this technology that are keeping us from appreciating one of the key sources of meaning in our lives? Which gets to the third principle, love. For Jews and for Christians, love is the very foundation of ethics. You are commanded in Leviticus to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your strength and all of your mind, and to love your neighbor as another self in all of their humanity and all of their dignity. This is the very basis of every other dimension of ethics. As we realized, I think many of us realized, too late in the era of internet and social media, this technology that initially offered us the promise of extraordinary human connection, in fact, had the power to very much distort our relationships with other people. And it perhaps wasn't intended, but the way that this technology developed, the way that we ingested it and became addicted to it, has absolutely affected our ability to see other people as anything more than their ideology or their tweets or their posts. It's absolutely affected young people. We spent most of the last 2 decades tweeting alone, texting alone. At least in the previous era of social media and internet, there was often another human brain at the end of these digital conversations. Now, in the era of powerful artificial intelligence, we have large models and APIs that simulate human personality. We have chatbots where there is no human at the other end of it. It's a product, sometimes a sycophantic product, sometimes a very addictive product. For those of us who work in education, we have a generation of young people who we know now are going to come of age in the shadow of these chatbots and who are going to learn how to form relationships and how to develop authentic human connections with this technology in their midst. We have got to figure out how we can help a generation of human beings habituate to love other human beings when there's this simulacrum that's in their midst. It's not to say that we're not going to be excited for really helpful and harmless AI bots that are going to be able to help us do our jobs. I use LLMs every single day in my work. And I love how ChatGPT always offers to go the extra mile for me every time I give it a prompt. They're like, you make me an 8,000-word research summary about how Christians reacted to the dropping of the atomic bombs. Boom, it's like the most helpful research assistant. I'm sorry, PhD students, like you guys are in big trouble as research assistants because it's so helpful. And then it's like, I would love to make you a handout. Can I please make you a handout? That's great. There's a place for this. But we also have to be on guard, especially as we navigate a period which we are all very well aware of, when love is in short supply. The habits, the virtues of interpersonal love, They're not ubiquitous. Human beings were never great at this commandment, and we're particularly going through a down spiral on this. And so what is it going to mean for us to cultivate the real virtue in light of this technology? And this is a question that we're going to have to wrestle with. Transcendence. It's important to Christians that we believe that there is objective truth, objective good, and objective beauty in the world that we did not create, that is given to us to understand and to contemplate, and that that's more important than any instrumental good that we could pursue with our lives. Instrumental goods are important, but this is more important. One of the things that we have to navigate as this technology becomes extraordinarily powerful and cool is this thinking that everything good will be made better by software and artificial intelligence. It can make literally any aspect of our lives better. There's no good that's independent of it. My colleague Adam has this funny story that we've talked about nonstop since last year that really drives this point home for me. Last January, Adam's got 4 young kids, and he was taking his eldest son to school, and they walked out of their house, and we just had the first big snowfall of the year here in South Bend. And he walks out of his house with his son, and his son stops him and says, "Dad, look, it's so beautiful. It looks like it was made by AI." And Adam's like, "No! It's made by God. It's like, there's beautiful things that are just given to you to enjoy. AI doesn't do absolutely everything." But his son is just like, he associates cool and beautiful things with this technology right now. And that's, obviously that's silly. He can grow out of that. But, I hope, Adam had a talk with him on the way to school. But, there's a more profound worry that's behind that comment. Another thing that we learned too late from the last 20 years in the era of internet and chat is that, we maybe should have known this all along, but human beings do not always desire the truth. Sometimes we just desire information that makes us feel good or that's relevant. And in fact, all of the algorithms of the last 20 years, they're not optimized for truth, they're optimized for relevance. They're optimized for your eyeballs look at it and you like it. The serotonin comes off and you want to keep looking. As we offload more and more of our intellectual and mental lives to powerful forms of artificial intelligence, we have to ensure that we are growing as people who are concerned with the truth. And even more practically, to power these new models, to power this artificial intelligence, requires tremendous natural resources. We heard about this from Cardinal Pierre last night. We are having to face trade-offs of what aspects of the natural world and our common home we are willing to sacrifice to build and power these models. Those are going to require very thoughtful and discerning conversations about what the externalities of innovation are. And Christians have a whole lot to offer those conversations. Finally, agency. It's not like we were in some moral Garden of Eden in the 20th century and now we're eating the forbidden AI fruit. Like, we've always been jerks. We have always had problems taking moral responsibility for our decisions. It's one of the things that it's extraordinarily important when human beings grow up in their families and in their churches and in their schools, that they learn how to cultivate and use their moral agency correctly, that they understand when they need to ask for forgiveness when they've done something wrong, which kinds of decisions they need to own, which kinds of decisions it's okay to be dependent on someone else to make. This is complicated. This is what moral development means. In the last 20 years, the economic model for the internet and for social media was an economy of attention. These firms made money, these products succeeded by their capacity to take a lot of your attention. So you do a Google search and you also look at an ad at the same time. You communicate with your mom on Instagram and you're looking at ads at the same time. Your attention is the thing that it's asking. That raised a series of really interesting moral questions that are now going to be compounded as we move from an economy of attention to agentic AI. where the products, what they're monetizing, what they're selling to users is not only things that will capture your attention, but will also make decisions on your behalf. And that's the great promise of these models. It's the great promise of these new applications that we're seeing being developed by large tech firms and by entrepreneurs. And there are some aspects of human work and human effort that it's going to be a great thing for models to take over for us. But there are some decisions that only a human conscience should make. And we're increasingly going to see debates about where to draw that line. In a practical way, we're at this university right now, we're having very spirited debates about what appropriate uses are for students of these models. What does it mean to write a paper in the era of AI? And what does it mean to form your mind and to have a moral position? I teach philosophy. I've got to decide, like, how do I know where it's authentically your conscience that says this is the answer to this question versus a model that writes a really nice essay for me? It's easy to put it all on the learners, but these moral tensions are actually happening very acutely for the educators as well. I don't like grading papers. It takes forever. It's so tedious. Can I still be a philosopher and use a large language model to grade all my students' essays in a course called God and the Good Life? Or is there something about education, there's some dimension of it where it's a person-to-person connection, where it's an expression of love, that you can't use models for this? These are questions that we're going to have to navigate. The Christians also have a perspective on, a complicated perspective, one that we have to articulate, but it's here, it's now. At a different level, we're seeing our country and large defense firms grapple with what the appropriate ways to integrate AI into defense and security applications are going to be. Are we going to be quickly looking at an era where we have to update just war theory to accommodate the decisions that models make about whether or not a civilian casualty is morally acceptable in battle? Are we going to have to attribute responsibility to agents for morally significant activities that they undertake when they're not a human agent? Large tech firms speak right now often about human beings being in the loop in decisions that agentic AI are going to make. I think, though we can have this discussion here at this conference, for the Christian community, it is not going to be sufficient for humans to be merely in the loop. But on morally significant actions and decisions, human consciences and human responsibility is going to have to be at the rock bottom of those decisions. But what does it look like as we develop this technology, and we hope that it gets faster and more optimal, for us to slow down and let us wet brains try to engage in these decisions with the AI? These are hard questions. Luckily, we don't have to tackle these questions alone. We have been so energized and inspired by the conversations of the last year. And every single person who's joining us for this conference is coming not only because they have these kinds of philosophical and theological insights, but also because you guys are doers. We have people in this community who are working on developing these models right now. We're financing the companies who are developing the vision for what these models are going to be. Developers have an extraordinarily important role to play in this ethical discussion. We have ethicists from many different universities, some of them faith-based like Notre Dame, some of them secular, who very much have to think, how are we going to update our doctrine, our teaching to meet the era of AI? We had to do that in the 20th century. We had to do it after World War II. We are facing a similar opportunity to grow our thinking on this. We have a whole lot of educators and pastors who are here with us looking for insights that they can take action on right now to try to serve the communities that are grappling with these questions and that are navigating this transition. We have Catholics, we have Protestants, we have evangelicals, we have people of different faith denominations and people of no faith background. We are very committed at Notre Dame to the idea that we want this framework to be inspired by and grounded in our Christian faith commitment, but for these teachings and this work to be a benefit to the world. And trying to navigate that tension right now, trying to think about what it means to be grounded in your faith but serving the whole world, That's difficult in every topic, including this one, but we're committed to that work. We are also committed, and this is the real hard lift, I think, for this conference and for the next few weeks and months, to doing the deep philosophical and theological work while also realizing we cannot wait. We can't wait to have ideas that we're putting in the hands of educators and pastors and policymakers in the public. We can't wait to participate in this debate because it is moving lightning fast. And one of the ways that you relinquish your seat at the table is by holding back, by being too tentative, by watching and waiting. That was how we missed the first big phase of the digital revolution. We cannot afford to do that now. The University of Notre Dame, we are all in on working with you and with others to try to tackle this issue. There are these generational questions in applied ethics that come up. We saw this with World War II and the advent of atomic weapons. In my field of philosophy, this absolutely revolutionized our thinking about ethics. That one decade in human history changed everything. We believe that we are living through such a decade now. And we have still the capacity to direct how this history-altering technology goes, but we've got to roll up our sleeves and do that work. That's what we're here to do at this conference. We're excited to start that conversation right now. So we've broken you guys up into tables. I said this was going to be like a weird wedding. Here we are. We want you to meet certain people. Like we're starting the conversation. I put that passage up again from one of our participants. We cannot slow down the technology, so we need to start speeding up the conversation. We're going to do that this morning. And what we'd like folks to do is take the next half hour, and we've got a few questions that are coming around. Just want to get discussions and reactions to what I've said, including like Father Nate's like hated it. Not enough dignity. Your insights, what could be added to this conversation? What are we missing? I've got my blind spots. I'm an academic. I obviously approach this as a philosopher. What are we missing from your perspective? I'd like you to go around, just briefly introduce yourself to the other people at your table. Like brief introductions. I'm looking at some of you. And then pick one or two of the questions that seem most interesting and start a conversation. In about half an hour or so, we're going to gather back together, and we've got, I'll call you back together, or Adam will, and Alex Hartemink, professor from Duke University, is going to give us a little primer on just like machine learning 101. And if you're part of the spectrum, the non-developer spectrum of this conference, it's like, I don't even totally understand what AI is. Alex is going to solve all of your problems. You're going to know everything about AI. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation with us.